and welcome to the Business of Data podcast. I'm your host, Catherine King, and it's a pleasure to have you join us today. In this series, we'll be speaking to senior data analytics leaders to share their experiences, challenges, and insights. Let's go ahead and dive straight into today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Business of Data podcast. Today, we are going to be discussing all things about how COVID-19 is transforming data and analytics, especially for the banking and financial service sector. Specifically, how you can embrace the challenges of 2020, and let's be honest, 2021 as it looks to be, and turn those challenges into opportunities. Now, with me is the wonderful Santiago Castro, who is the Chief Data Officer for FBN Bank, who's going to help me dive into this very interesting area. Now, Santiago is currently in charge of directing and overseeing the digital transformation for FBN Bank. He believes data and technology leadership should act as a catalyst for cultural change across the organisation. Now, at the start of 2020, he was made the Interim COO. Since then, someone else has now taken over that position. But initially, he was placed in charge of really helping the bank adapt to its operations and home working when COVID first really became a problem for everyone. So, Santiago, it's lovely to have you joining us today.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for the invitation.
Fantastic. Now, I'm really looking forward to this discussion, especially as you have been a friend of Crinium for quite a while. You recently spoke at our DNA Live Europe event, and you're also going to be speaking at the CDO Europe event in early November as well. How have you been finding doing conferences virtually as opposed to in person?
Yeah, I guess, like everything is a change, so it has plus and cons, right? Of course, we missed interacting with people, and the great thing of the, kind of being in a place, you see the feedback, you talk to people, you kind of create and network with people. But at the same time, it has also opportunities. I mean, it allowed us to keep in touch. We are still doing these events, even if many of other events have been canceled. This community is still active, and we can still exchange in a time that we really need to exchange. We need to share ideas because all this is unprecedented, and we're all kind of learning and kind of coping as we go. Plus, in another way, it has also allowed us to reach beyond what we used to reach. I mean, I'm talking in events that are European or even in other regions of the world. We just a quick, connect and talk, which it would have been much difficult before you needed to travel. So all this has, again, opportunities as well as areas that we need to, in a way, see how we cope with them.
Absolutely. And I think that sets the tone of this conversation really nicely, actually, that although there are challenges and, none of us can really, disregard that, but actually there's opportunities to come out of it as well. Like you said, the fact that we're able to do European-wide events and have lots of people join us, but also different types of people who perhaps wouldn't have been able to join as well due to family commitments and travel and things like that. So it's fantastic. Now, before we dive into the main discussion, I am keen to pick up on that point about you being the Interim COO. How did you find that? What sort of work were you doing when you were in that position?
Yeah, that was a really interesting experience. So first of all, I mean, I started the journey in the bank 2 years ago as a chief data officer, and in a way, first generation of chief data officers that in many organizations are starting to appear. And one of the questions people ask often to chief data officers is how well established and recognized within the C-level suite the chief data officers are coming into organizations. And in a way, for me, it was a great opportunity to prove that data is becoming very strategic, because in January, our chief operative officer at the time left. They asked me to take his step up and take his role in the interim, and that shows how recognized our area of data is becoming even among the C-suite. Now, it also came in a very interesting times, because I didn't know in January all what was going to happen. So I was, in a way, stepping up to help the operations of the bank, and then 2 months after, the government announced that everybody has to go and work from home. And this is a very traditional bank where we were used to work, of course, in the buildings. In banking, you think that everything is safe within the building. So in 2 weeks, we have to move all the operations to work remotely. And that came with a lot of challenges, but also a lot of interesting insights and learnings for technology and data in a way, because without all this, we couldn't have done it so quickly.
So I think it's fair to say you didn't quite know what you were getting yourself into in January, and then a whole heap of work came your way, which certainly, I'm sure, been interesting for you. And I mean, I think it's fair to say, prior to 2020, if someone had said to you, "Hey, Santiago, you're going to move your entire workforce and operations to a remote-based company within 2 weeks," I think you would have advised they go and speak to someone for such a crazy suggestion.
Agree. That's definitely didn't see that one coming, but it's like many things, you need sometimes to be pushed to do it, and there you are.
Absolutely. And I think that leads me nicely on to my first question, which is really the key word of 2020 for me has been adaptability, and how, COVID has obviously thrown a huge curveball in everyone's direction, regardless of who you are. And, how you've dealt with that is a massive testament to where you are, where you're currently sat now towards the end of 2020. So I'm keen to know to what extent you've had to adapt your data strategy in response to the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a really good word, the idea of adaptability, and I will also kind of link it with flexibility. I would say that, if anything, this pandemic has, of course, put into a real test scenario about operational resilience and business continuity, because all organizations have had to endure and prove that we can still work. When in 2 weeks we needed to move operations, as I was saying, to work remotely, we managed to actually work in all our business processes and business services without interruption, which shows that in real extreme scenarios, we're still resilient. Now, what did happen, and this is the point you are talking about, adaptability, is that usually the strategy of organizations to be resilient tended to be very much into having goals, objectives, policies, and of course, all coming in a way with procedures that kind of, in a way, are consistent and defensive, which is good and is important. But this challenge we lived here allowed us to also open our mind to flexibility, to explore new ideas, explore new ways of doing, and of course, of being progressive. And it's not one or the other. We are actually living in a world where we need both. We need to be consistent, but now we are also putting in our strategy the emphasis of flexibility and adaptability. And actually, that also makes us resilient. So we are resilient because we're consistent, but also because we're flexible. And that balance, I believe, is something we didn't have that much before the pandemic. And now we know that we need to do, especially in a world that keeps changing and technology keeps changing. And for me, that's the winner, is that now that mindset that before was difficult to understand are starting to really grow in people's mind. The more you adapt, the more you are flexible, the more you cope with the change and the world that is changing very fast.
Absolutely. And I think it's something that people are seeing in their own personal lives as well, especially for those of us UK based, where, we're having announcements on weekly, occasionally they're happening daily, where things are changing. So I think for businesses to adopt that same amount of flexibility and adaptability is, only appropriate. So when we talk about transformation and, dealing with the situation that has been handed to us, I think it's probably quite fair to say that those who were a bit further down the line on their digital transformation have probably found adapting and being flexible a little bit easier, because, suddenly moving everything to remote work and adapting in such ways, probably didn't throw up as many challenges. Is that fair to say? Is that something that you'd agree with? And that those further down the line have been, more fortunate in these times?
Yeah, definitely. I will definitely agree with that. As I mentioned, I started the journey in the bank 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, we didn't have a centralized governed data hub, a centralized data strategy, a kind of a data team and data governance around all that. And we were very much paper-based, manual-based. We were pretty much, in a way, working as many organizations do. And luckily enough, we started the journey 2 years ago to start digitizing a lot of that paper, to starting automating a lot of the processes, to start bringing business intelligence, reporting, analytics, and most importantly, data flags, or what we called, in a way, automation of exceptions. Now, what all this means is that if 2 years ago we have had this, it would have been very difficult to work from home when people depended on paper that they needed to check, where they depended on physically being there to see exceptions and problems. Now we have automatic controls that tell us, so we can be remote, but with 100% reassurance that things are working and that we are not having risk events. And in a bank, a risk event can cost a lot of money. So because we managed to automate, to digitize, to actually bring that intelligence into our processes, and in a way give us the peace of mind that things could work even if we physically were not checking them, we could move without having that many issues. I said, if this pandemic has happened 10 years ago and we didn't have internet, the world couldn't have worked from home. Well, our bank 2 years ago was not ready to work from home either. So definitely having started the journey has enabled us to be resilient, and it has accelerated. Those that didn't jump in that journey, I think, and I believe, will have struggled and will struggle more. On the other hand, the ones that were already digitally born, and we see it more and more, the Amazons of the world, the people that has already digital offerings and digital labs, those are the ones that actually at the moment are having a hype. Everybody's consuming online. Everybody's consuming. Even the retailers are seeing their business model shift to work digitally. So definitely it's been an accelerating in that area, and those that were already there are benefiting from it.
Absolutely. So before I move on to my next section of questions that I want to ask you, something I'm really keen to know is, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you have had to face this year, and why does that one challenge spring to mind for you?
So this crisis is inedited in a way, and was also very kind of challenging in a way, because most of what we called the contingency plans and the business continuity plans were always thinking about a crisis that comes from you not being able to access your building, or there is an earthquake, you cannot go in premises, or there is a cyber attack, or your system doesn't work. So it was either physical infrastructure or system infrastructure that were suffering, and how we cope with that. However, this crisis was a people crisis. This time, our people were sick, our people were out of work, our people were stressed, our people were actually nervous, and our people needed to cope with a different way of doing. And that scenario we haven't really foreseen, and it's a very new type of crisis. So what was the challenge? The challenge was often working, when I say we had to move operations very quickly, not only we had to adapt, we had to also adapt in times where some people were falling sick. We have some teams that were, half of the teams were there, the other half wasn't there. And the half that was there was very nervous because their family, friends were also getting sick or stressed, or people are losing jobs, or the situation is new. So we need to cope with mental health, with stress, with fatigue. People are tired. Those that are working are working. So for me, that was the biggest challenge. And in a way, it was also the greatest opportunity, because so many people step up. And then you see the good people that really kind of cope on those extreme scenarios are really good elements that help us moving forward.
Absolutely. I think it's certainly a very important point to make, is that actually, although moving everyone to being remote working is one huge task, actually the workers themselves and the team members, managing that alongside personal life is actually a huge undertaking as well. I think it's a really good point. Now, it does nicely lead on to my next section, because I know you're really passionate, as I said in your introduction, about data culture. Now, you say there is often a large gap between cultural adoption and technology. and the pandemic has shortened this gap, I believe. So why do you think it took a global pandemic for organizations to really embrace these new data-driven technologies?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I do believe that, technology is changing very fast. Especially information technology, data. I remember a couple of years ago, we started talking with business intelligence, data analytics, big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence. You name it. Every time there is a new word, and it changed every couple of months, and there is new releases of every software that allows you to do so many more things and so many tools. Now, people have always used tools, but the time they get to learn them, the time they get used to them, there is a new one that comes. They need to question and challenge. Why do I change if I used to do it well? And why will we need to now put the effort on learning something? So that gap is always been there, and the fear of the unknown or the need to kind of resist against something new is always there. Why the pandemic? I will always say crises have something really interesting, if we can see it this way, is that it put us to extreme situations where we need to actually get rid of inefficiencies.
Yeah.
Crises have, in a way, that destructive innovation that comes with it. It destroys something of an old order to bring, in a way, the possibilities of a new order. The way we used to work was very much based on industrial age, where people needed to physically be in spaces and physically do manual work. And actually, the industrial revolutions were, in a way, a muscle power. You have horsepower of machines that allowed the humans to do either lift things that we couldn't physically do, or do more fast or quicker manual work. Now, the new industrial revolution has this really interesting ingredient that is brain power, that is bringing software. Computers allowed us to cope with information in a way that our brain cannot cope with the volume or the quantity or the complexity. Now, it also brings us in a new way of working. We have knowledge workers, and data is about that. It's about actually mental power and knowledge power. The beauty of this is that this crisis allowed us to finally shift that old way of working, especially for banking and every service industry that is not necessarily in complete continuity of the industrial work, because we are service workers. So we are about knowledge, about and the inefficiencies from that industrial fabric type of work are get rid of with this pandemic. We have now the possibility to collaborate in platforms, to exchange and connect in ways we couldn't, to actually share insights and create analytics in ways that we don't necessarily need to do it the old way. So I think the pandemic just put us to an extreme to get rid of an old way and show us opportunities of a new way of doing.
I think that's such an interesting point, what you've said there, Santiago. It's almost that link between data culture and working culture, and actually that old rhetoric that, Corinium, we've been remote based the entire, we've been a remote based company from the beginning. And often I'd get jokes said, oh, you probably spend all the day watching Netflix, you don't hardly do any work. Obviously, people now know that's not true, having been remote working themselves. And actually what this pandemic has done is it's removed that opportunity for people to say, oh no, you've got to be in the office, you need to be present, people need to see you working to believe you are. And actually, it's almost done the same for data-driven culture as well, is that actually it's removed that opportunity for gut instincts and inefficient decisions, because you need to have that evidence very, very much present to make quick and efficient decisions on. Which leads me into the next point I was going to ask, which is when March rolled around, which is when it all kind of really started, did you have executive buy-in immediately to kind of proceed with the data strategy and decisions that you needed to make?
Yeah, we were lucky, as I mentioned, that we were in a journey that started before. So because for 2 years we had already got that buy-in on the digital transformation need, on making our bank more modern, more data driven, and investing in technology. In a way, what this actually created, and I think this is a really interesting point, is that it allowed seeing the investment in technology and in data with a different lens. So Before, if people were questioning and were still adopting it, but still questioning, they didn't realize how, thanks to that investment, we are resilient today and we managed to continue working. Without having, I give two examples. GDPR was a great point. When I started working in the bank, it was 2 years ago, GDPR was starting to be implemented and everybody was talking about it. The investment was at that time done because we needed to be compliant. So people invest because otherwise they close your shop. However, today they see that investment with a different lens. If we hadn't classified all our data, if we didn't know where our data assets were, if we didn't know who reached what data needs to be encrypted, secure, which one is more open, etc. Today that we are remote working, we actually realize that we're in control. We know what we have. We know who access what. We know that we don't actually are exposing our data assets as we used to. And even better, we can get much more value of it because we had put the house in order. So those are examples that shows how it's not that it got more buy-in, it kind of is now so evident because they see the value being realized in resilience terms and actually making us more competitive. Because nowadays that resilience becomes a competitive advantage.
Absolutely. I mean, across all the different formats of content that we produce at the Business of Data, something that is often said and written about is actually the power of use cases and being able to show value. And I think for those, like you say, who are in any doubt, what 2020 has provided is a fantastic user case for actually, if you are further ahead in digital transformation, if you have got your data, in line, and if you've got a data literate workforce, then things do become easier. And as you say, most importantly, you're still very, very competitive in what is going to be very, very challenging times ahead, I'm sure. So with that being said, would you say that your workforce is a little bit more data savvy, having been remote working and actually probably leaning on data a little bit more than in the office? Is that something fair to say?
So I would say there is definitely much more demand for data products today. If before it felt that we were in a way kind of trying to prove a business case or trying to show value or trying to demonstrate, now it's more about we got it, we want more of it. We want to be trained, we want to have more interesting insights. I'll give a second example of what I was mentioning before, how the data projects had actually acquired a different meaning and business value. When we started the journey, we were doing some analytics, and I was saying part of the interesting analytics, especially in the back office, in kind of process efficiencies, is that not only we understood better how we do our processes, we create efficiencies, but also we kind of see when we were having risk events, and we create, I say, automated controls in order to avoid risk events. We had alerts when things were happening. Now, having invested in some of them before going to remote working has proved that now managers have the peace of mind that whenever their new workforce working from home are maybe getting close to a risk event, they get an alert. So they basically remotely can have the peace of mind that things are working. That creates a huge demand. So now our data team is full of demand of do another automated control. Can we get this automated control? Can we know about in advance when this is happening? So in a way, if before we're trying to prove the value, now everybody gets it and they are demanding so much. And that is great, because that's the position you want to be, where people are not questioning, they're actually demanding. And many of them either are asking to be trained so they themselves do their own automated reports because they want to feel in control, and data give them that visibility. When you are not physically in the office, you know that things are still working.
Well, it's fantastic to hear they're so data hungry, and long may that be the case. I hope for you. So in our last few moments here, Santiago, I'm keen to know for you, whether professionally or personally, what the biggest takeaway for you will be when we finish 2020.
So I would say there are at least two good interesting takeaways. One is your people and your team. I said the biggest challenge was around people, but also what I have learned, and I think is a good takeaway, is try to have good teams. And if you have a good team, In normal times, they're going to be competitive. In challenging times, they're going to be resilient and step up. And I saw different teams having different challenges, but those teams that were already underperforming really struggled under this crisis. And I think those teams that were good, and in the data team, we had a great team. And I think that has made the data team in a way become leading in the example and bringing up, kind of stepping up into the opportunity. So a great team is a great asset to have, and that is a takeaway in challenging times. And we are ready now, I guess, to grow and be able to be flexible. And that's the second takeaway. The idea of flexibility combined with, of course, the consistency. So having opened our mindset, shift our mindset to the fact that we need to be consistent, but also flexible. And I think the leaders today of this pandemic are those organizations that were born in technology and that has always been about flexibility and innovation. If you see, and coming back to your example, the kind of working in the office type of approach, which was very much in question for those organizations that were already working from home, and people saying, oh, are you doing something? Well, if you look at the Googles of the world, the Facebook of the world, the Amazon of the world, all these giants that are leading the race at the moment, their business model before all this was not that much about a hierarchy and necessarily being in control of everything. It was about innovation. It was about creating spaces and giving flexibility to their staff to actually do things in new ways because they lead the market, because they allowed innovation a good idea. So I'm not saying it's one or the other, but what I'm saying is having that mindset that allows to marry and balance both sides is a really good takeaway of these challenging times.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for giving me some of your time today, Santiago. It's always a pleasure catching up with you, and I look forward to watching you speak at CDO Europe later in November.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for listening.
What an absolutely fantastic conversation. I really especially enjoyed Santiago's points around how important people are during this time, and actually really recognising the challenges of mental health, stress and fatigue that teams will inevitably be feeling during this very, very tough time that we're all experiencing. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and actually acknowledging how being digitally transformed and working on that journey has made them far more resilient and flexible to these challenges than they would have experienced if they hadn't have been already on that journey. And I think that's very interesting to then compare them to the digital native companies such as Amazon and Google that Santiago brought in towards the end of that conversation there. As always, make sure you are subscribed to the Business of Data platform and following us on socials to be first in line for our thought-leading content and insights. For now, stay safe, stay well, and I will see you on the next episode.